Mr. Hollis, thank you so much for joining us. Why are you running?
Well, I'm running because I feel like representatives nowadays are doing kind of a bad job at actually representing their districts.
How so?
Well, on TV, we hear a lot of back and forth about, what they think, especially during this impeachment nonsense. And they rarely talk about what their constituents think, what their districts think. And usually when they come back, they kind of stick to their bases, if they do come back. And a lot of representatives nowadays, they spend most of their time in Washington. A lot of them don't even really live in the districts that they represent. And I think we need better representation overall.
And so what is the essence of your campaign then? What is the rationale for it then?
Well, I've been involved in several things throughout my life. I started as a Christian missionary down in Latin America and over in Germany, where I saw kind of firsthand what it's like to see communities that don't have as good of economies as we do, especially due to big government. And I also came back and I became the program director for a nonprofit where we started after-school programs for at-risk youth. So once again, going into bad areas that are affected by all kinds of different policy, where you're seeing children kind of just struggling to survive and not getting the support that they needed. And then after that, I jumped into the TV and film industry, where I started doing films and PSAs on human trafficking. It was kind of a passion of mine at the time, and I transitioned into Hollywood hoping to do some of that type of work. But you learn really quickly that that is a machine, that they have a very specific agenda that they want to push forward, and if you don't fall in line with that agenda, then you kind of get pushed to the side. I was fortunate enough to make it kind of to the top of my industry, working with major studios, which I enjoyed. But at the same time, I really got tired of the propaganda that was coming out of there. I don't think it's right, especially when you're not being honest to your audience. And I believe that the American people kind of need to have the curtain pulled back so they can see what is happening.
So as far as what your priorities are, how does all that relate to what your priorities are if you were to be elected?
Well, we saw a candidate come into Dallas, Colin Allred, who talked a very good game. He understood the right words that needed to be said. He told us that he was going to be an independent voice within the Democratic Party, and he has instead fallen on the partisan track. He votes 100% with Nancy Pelosi. He hasn't done the work that he promised to, because he's kind of part of that political machine. He's been in politics for most of his career outside of the NFL. And at the end of the day, these people have a lot of needs. Healthcare is one of the biggest ones, and nobody wants to talk about healthcare anymore. Immigration reform is a huge one, especially here in Texas, as we're dealing with what happens when you don't secure your border. And education reform is at the top of people's list as well, especially as their property taxes continue to go up. And once again, we see politicians paying lip service and saying the right things, but when it comes to putting rubber to the road, you don't see a lot of action.
So I want to take a deeper dive into the issues, but want to ask you, you're in a Republican primary now, so we don't know if you're going to make it to the next step to go against Colin Allred. Yeah. So my question to you is, what makes you better than the others in the Republican primary? Why should people trust you and go with you?
Well, a couple of things. One, my life experience expands several industries and kind of goes all over the world. I didn't just spend my career doing one thing. I've been able to go into different industries and do do a really good job of it, and show that I have kind of unparalleled work ethic when it comes to putting my mind towards something and getting it done. I'm huge with attention to detail. I dig into the meat of issues, not just the rhetoric and not just the talking points of it. I want to understand why things are the way they are, and I want to understand how we fix them. I don't hear a lot of that on the campaign trail. I hear a lot of platitudes, I hear a lot of rhetoric, but at the end of the day, when it comes to actually digging into the substance of the issues, my fellow candidates can't really do that. Why that is, I'm not sure, but I would like to see more candidates spend time learning the issues that their constituents are truly concerned about, and not just telling the constituents what they should be concerned about.
you're relatively new to Texas,
Relatively, yes.
right? And records show that you were running for Congress against Adam Schiff in Southern California for this cycle. So explain to me how you came here to run in the 32nd District in Texas in the Dallas area.
So that was really early on. I started to get involved in politics because, like I said, I wasn't seeing the type of representation that we needed in Congress. In that specific community, there are a lot of major issues like the homeless crisis, cost of living crisis, you know, a lot of different things, and we weren't hearing the correct solutions to these problems. A lot of people were stepping up to do it, but not bringing those real solutions. And so I threw my hat in the ring very early on and seemed to have been getting some support. But very quickly, I was fired from my job because of it and blackballed within the industry, especially after coming out as a conservative and announcing my support for President Trump. It was about 24 hours after that moment, I received a text message saying I was being let go. And you know, a lot of people turned their backs.
And what was the reason given?
There was no reason given. I've reached out multiple times. I have attempted to, you know, kind of right the ship in a way, and nobody wants to discuss it. And it wasn't until I made my political beliefs known that all of a sudden the perception that I had, you know, around me started to change.
Were you working for a company, or were you a freelancer? Or
so at the time, I was working for a few different studios, Fox, Warner Brothers, a few
as
others.
a freelancer?
No, we're in a union. So yeah, so in order to work at the studio level, you have to be in a union, which is another thing that I disagree with. I don't think that you should be forced into it. But if you want to get a job at that level, you're forced to join a union.
And so the union fired you, or?
No, the people on my show at the time fired me, and then, you know, all of my industry contacts essentially turned their backs on me.
And then your decision was to move here.
Yeah, when I started looking at, you know, where do I go next? Where can you restart? Texas was a natural fit for me. I've been coming here most of my life. I have family in the area over in Fort Worth and down south, and it's the best state left in this union, really. The economy is through the roof. The people have been amazing. You know, cost of living is a lot lower, which is a little bit easier to swallow. And it's a place where if you have a great idea, you can come and you can make it flourish. And so transitioning here, you know, with all the people that, you know, I do know out here, and because of those things, it was a natural fit. There really wasn't anywhere else in the United States that I would have gone, to be perfectly frank.
And you still wanted to run for Congress?
Yes, because I believe that we need to bring a lot of attention to some major issues that aren't being talked about, especially because a lot of things are being swallowed up by the impeachment process. And there's, you know, healthcare, like I said, is one of the biggest issues. I've personally had to deal with, you know, what it's like to be on, you know, lose your health care after the financial crisis. My family, we lost houses, we lost cars, we lost our health care, and we had to fight our way back. My grandparents right now, they're dealing with major health care issues. You know, the cost of it is going through the roof, as my grandfather is dealing with Parkinson's, and they're maxing out is the problem. About halfway through the year, they reach their limit on their health care, and they're coming through out of pocket for it. And so there's a lot of issues with that system that need to be fixed, that I would like to be a part of, and try to help bring attention back to that. And like I said before, immigration is massive, education is massive. And I believe mental health reform would be a huge thing as well, because, you know, as we're seeing across this nation, there's a homeless epidemic, there is a violence epidemic, and a lot of that stems from, you know, what is happening in those people's lives and how we can help fix that.
You could have run in any congressional district, I suppose. Why did you select this one?
Because I live here. And at the end of the day, if I'm going to get involved in a community, I want to get involved in the community that I'm in. I'm not here just to run for the sake of running or to just hand pick a district to go to. I want to be involved in the community that I'm essentially starting a life in. and you know, getting ready hopefully soon to have a family as well. And Dallas is the fastest growing metropolitan area in the United States. It's incredible what's happened here. So coming here was just natural at the end of the day.
You mentioned healthcare as one of your priority issues. What is your prescription for lowering the cost of insurance, of care, et cetera?
Well, we're going to need, it's going to be a very tough reform that we're going to have to put through. Obviously, after the ACA and how it was repealed, you know, there's a lot of...
well, it hasn't been repealed.
Well,
I mean, essentially, it's still the law,
yes,
but they've taken the major provision out of there,
exactly,
and the courts are waiting to weigh in.
Yeah.
But it's still law.
It is, yes, you're right. From a technical standpoint, it just doesn't have any teeth anymore. And you know, as we're seeing, premiums are shooting through the roof because of it. But also during the Obama administration, we saw premiums rise 7 times more than they were supposed to, primarily because they were relying on young people to get involved in the system. And at the end of the day, young people, you know, they don't really necessarily think they need health care. You know, a lot of times they'll just stay home and take NyQuil, you know, and get over it.
So you would scrap it?
Yeah, we need to start over from an honest footing, where we're not lying to the American people about the fact that you can keep your doctor, you can keep the program that you have. Premiums are going to lower instead of, you know, go higher. The deductibles are through the roof as well.
So how do you lower costs and provide some type of insurance for people where they can get the coverage they want at a decent price?
Well, there's a few things that we can do to kind of stop the leaks until we do a full reform, and that is, I believe you need to make health insurance portable. So wherever you go, if you have, you know, if you get insurance at work and you decide to change jobs, or you even lose your job, I believe you should be able to take that health care with you. Obviously, getting rid of the employer mandate as well, to where employers can kind of pay into the employee instead to use for their own health care insurance, I think is a big deal. Roth health savings accounts is another one, which will help, you know, for catastrophic care, and also help utilize your tax credit to go towards premiums or high deductibles. I think we need to get rid of the income-based tax credit, because the range of it was too high. It started at $1,800, went all the way up to $10,000, and then if you guessed your next year's income incorrectly, you would have to pay a portion of that tax credit back. So I think we get rid of it as a whole, and we make it one lump sum. I've heard some numbers floated out there, somewhere around like $8,000 for everyone. Maybe it's that, maybe it's a little bit lower. I'd have to look at the numbers just to see what it would do. But those are a few steps that we can start in the right direction as we, you know, take on this massive issue that's going to take efforts from both sides, really.
You mentioned immigration reform.
Yes.
So what would you do differently from what the president has suggested? Do you support President Trump's efforts?
I do support President Trump's efforts, and I think a lot of the details have been lost in the rhetoric. People have gotten so riled up about things, you know, specifically talking about the border wall, and people forget.
So you support the wall?
I do.
Expansion?
Yeah, I support expansion of it. Primarily, one, this was a bipartisan effort over the past 20 years. Both sides have voted yes on the border, either fencing or some sort of barrier. And he's the only president that's come along, really since George Bush put some funding towards more fencing, that has decided to actually take up that effort. And I believe because it's him, there's been this huge pushback on the other side. And what gets lost in the rhetoric is CBP has made it perfectly clear from the beginning, they don't think it's going to stop people, but it's going to slow them down so they can respond faster. Because at the end of the day, if you have something in your way that you have to get over, it's a lot easier to respond to that than having to chase someone down through the desert. And so they've made it clear, we don't think this will prevent everyone from coming over, but we do think it's a deterrence. And like I said, they'll be able to respond quicker. But more so, we need comprehensive immigration reform that doesn't just focus on the wall. And that's really what is also getting lost in the rhetoric. We need more judges to deal with the backlog, because some countries go all the way back to the 90s on their backlog, which is kind of ridiculous. Some of those cases can be shifted to municipal courts to help speed that up as well, which we need to do. I believe that we also need to expand our visa program for the amount of things that you can apply for, because right now it's pretty small.
Are you talking about H-1 visas for high-tech people?
I believe in H-1 visas for sure. You know, and we want the best and the brightest to come to this country and help be a part of our economy, but also, you know, other you know, categories as well. And so I agree with the fact that we're keeping people outside of the country for now while we deal with their applications. I believe that a lot of these applications can be handled within an embassy within their country, similar to, you know, I actually have a friend who came over from Africa 20, 30 years ago, and he had to apply for his visa in the embassy in his home country before he was allowed to come over. And he applied, he got it, everything went fine, hopped on a plane, came over to the United States, and has become a major part of this economy as well. So I think the idea that it has to be at the southern border where, you know, where people have to apply and come, I don't think that's feasible, one, especially as we see more and more caravans come up from Central America.
One of the unresolved issues is what to do about dreamers, the people who were brought here illegally when they were young. They didn't have a choice. They came with their parents. And so do you think there should be a path toward citizenship for them?
I'm not sure about a path towards citizenship yet. I do believe that we need a path towards legalization so we can, you know, bring them out of the shadows, as people say, and get them a part of the system. I think we have to look at criminal records as well. If there is some sort of criminal record, then, you know, maybe we have to, you know, deal with them in a certain way. It was interesting though when President Trump first got into office and he offered DACA up in response to the border wall funding, and it completely got denied by the Democrats, which I thought was very short-sighted, and it could have, you know, solved a lot of issues for people. Obviously, you know, people who were brought here, you know, against their will or didn't have a choice in the matter, and who are being essentially good Americans, you know, being a part of the system and giving back, then, you know, we have to find a way to bring them into the system officially. Because at the end of the day, it really comes down to resources. You know, we have to know where to allocate our resources, especially dealing with the $26 trillion deficit right now, or debt, I should say, and with unfunded liabilities, which are, you know, upwards of 126 trillion right now as well. You know, if you know who's here legally, you know where to put those resources. If you don't, it's just getting scattered into the wind.
There are an estimated, 11 to 12 million people who are here illegally, and many of them have been here for years. What do you believe should be done about their legal status?
I think we should look at whether or not there are criminal records. If there aren't, then, you know, I believe there is a pathway to legalization for them, some sort of either, you know, green card, visa program. If they came here by choice, illegally, understanding that they were breaking the law, then I think there should be some sort of fine that's issued, that they can, you know, kind of help to pay back whatever resources have gone, you know, to them over these years, and show that they're willing to step out and be a part of the system. And potentially after, you know, a certain amount of time, maybe we look into you know, citizenship after, you know, they prove that they're going to be, you know, part of our system.
You also mentioned education reform as one of your top priorities. How so?
Well, I think we're all pretty aware of how education is failing our kids.
How would you describe it as a failure?
Well, we're 28th in the world in literacy, which is kind of insane, especially when we spend so much on education. Here in Texas, property taxes are going up, and yet our schools are still 40th in the nation. And we spend a tremendous amount of money on education. In, you know, other states, they spend even more and they're worse.
So what would you do to change that?
I think we need more school choice. There's what Betsy DeVos has been doing over the past couple of years, I think we're being put on the right track. But what we're seeing is, take homeschooling in public school, for example. We're seeing that homeschool students are far more prepared for college than public school students are. It's about 55% to about 87%, which is kind of insane to me, especially because of the fact, like I said, we spend so much money on education, especially public education. I think funding needs to go with the child, you know, wherever their parents decide that they're going to go. whether it's private school, whether it's public school, homeschooling, even charter school. The funding should kind of travel with them so they have more school choice that way.
Some people worry that that would hurt public schools.
It might, but right now public schools have gotten billions of dollars throughout this country, and they continue to get worse. I also, there's also a very left-leaning ideology that's coming out of schools these days, and that just, that's a lot, because, primarily because, a lot of teachers, they end up, a lot of them tend to be Democrat. And there was a study recently that said 9 out of 10 teachers are Democrats. And we're seeing kind of political ideology being inserted into education, and I don't think that's right. When I was in school, we didn't sit there and talk about, whether or not the president was right or wrong. We'd sit there and just talk about the facts, and we would be educated from an unbiased standpoint. So I think giving parents the right to choose where they're going to send their kids so they can determine, which schools align with their values, is a huge thing. And once again, we have to get rid of Common Core at the end of the day, and STAR testing. We've gotten kind of out of hand when it comes to standardized testing, and studies have shown that it doesn't prepare the children any better.
You mentioned debt.
Yes, sir.
So how would you start, erasing some of that and, getting rid of these deficits? Is this, do you keep the tax cuts that the president passed? Do you pass additional tax cuts? Do you pass spending cuts? What's your prescription? Or tax increases?
Yeah, well, so one interesting thing is for every $1 billion spent, there's about 150 million that goes towards redundancy or waste. I think we have too much redundancy within the federal government. The federal government has grown so massive that it's almost become, too big to fail, kind of, like with banks. And so we need to cut back on redundancy. I think we can implement a sort of hiring freeze to where we're able to shift people around into areas that we may be lacking some employees, but at the end of the day, we need to shrink the federal government. It's really the only way that we're going to be able to pay down our debt. And with the way that President Trump is negotiating trade deals, kind of shoring up that gap between how much we're spending as opposed to how much we're taking in from trade will also help that as well. Because as we know, we've sent tons of money out to different countries. China was a massive one. And so if you're...
But that's not really a government thing, that's private sector money. We're not talking about government money going over there. We're talking about goods and services being exchanged.
But the more money you're able to bring into the country and stimulate the economy, the better it'll be for all of us, because that's tax revenue. And bringing manufacturing back to this country would be a huge help to that. If companies are able to save money, if they're able to bring in more revenue that is being taxed here, then that helps our economy at the end of the day. We also, we need to look at cutting spending. I mean, overall. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If we continue to spend more than we take in, we're going to go bankrupt. And yeah.
Let me ask you about another debate that's been going on for years, but in Texas really last year, and that is about guns and whether there need to be further gun restrictions or not. Where are you on this issue?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the Second Amendment and protecting it, just like I am protecting all of the amendments in the Constitution. At the end of the day, what we see with gun stats is very misleading. 70% of all gun deaths are suicide, and a majority of gun deaths are done with handguns and not rifles. And so when you start digging into the numbers, you start to realize that it's become, once again, a rhetoric game as opposed to a facts game. And at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about, like I mentioned before, is mental health. Because no matter how many weapons you take away from someone, there's still a person who thinks it's okay to take another life to solve an issue. And we have to figure out why they think that and what has happened in their life to where they've reached that point of no return, where they can just take a weapon and go murder as many people as they want. And taking guns away isn't going to solve that. We saw recently at the church shooting nearby, where responsible gun owners responded to someone coming in trying to commit another mass shooting, and it ended within seconds because responsible gun owners who were trained, who understood the scenario, who had been prepared for this, they stepped up and did what a lot of people who have been unarmed haven't been able to do. So once again, at the end of the day, it comes back to mental health.
And so when Democrats call for more background checks and essentially eliminating the loophole so that even private gun sales or transfers are included in that, what do you say to that?
Well, what's interesting about that is the background. There was a report that used to come out that was, it would show how many people were red flagged on background checks and how many people were stopped. And that report stopped coming out right around 2014. Thomas Massey actually talked about this pretty well. And what they realized is in 2014, 30,000 people were flagged on background checks, and only 30 of them were prevented from buying a weapon. And so what that shows is the background checks aren't as effective as people think or people want to think. And obviously, what we have in place now, we should keep. I don't think we should, start repealing background checks. But expanding background checks, I don't think is going to solve the issue either. And I lean more towards I lean more towards civil rights at the end of the day. Or protecting your liberties. With the surveillance state that we have now, we're constantly getting our liberties stripped away from us. And I think expanding those background checks is another way that we're just going to continue to strip liberties from people.
And I wanted to ask you about impeachment. You've mentioned it. Do you think the president should be removed from office?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Well, I haven't seen the burden of proof. At the end of the day, the articles that were drafted have no relation to the U.S. Penal Code. The way that the abuse of power was written, you could pretty much impeach any president for that. And also what people are forgetting about this whole Ukraine matter is the U.S. released aid in 2017, 2018, and there was only a holdup in 2019. And something happened in 2019. A new president of the Ukraine was elected, a comedian who had never had any experience in politics, who didn't really have much of a background. And this is a country that has dealt with massive corruption for decades, to the point where the Obama administration even admitted that they weren't going to give them the lethal aid that they needed. They gave them like MREs and blankets and things like that, but they didn't give them lethal aid, and they admitted that corruption was rampant in that country. So when you see a massive shift, like what happened in their political realm, where someone new just comes in out of nowhere, and they still have to put together a cabinet, and they still have to put together a parliament, which people don't realize the parliament didn't get put into place until September. So for the president to say, we're going to hold up on this to make sure that there isn't rampant corruption, and to make sure that this new administration is going to actually investigate corruption and not just push it to the side like previous administrations have, I think he was right to do that. And it is within his power as president to do that.
So bottom line, not an impeachable offense.
Not an impeachable offense, no.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.